Welcome to another episode of the Launchpad. We're now at episode 10, and I hope you got a chance to tune in next week. Whether you are a DFS pro or whether you're brand new and just trying to get into DFS, I had Chris Robin and Jordan Vanek on here, and we talked nothing but DFS, and it was just a great show. And what we do every single week on this show is just have a completely different topic to talk about. And here today with Thor Nystrom and Sam Wagman, there is nothing better to possibly talk about with these two gentlemen than about this incoming rookie class. So that is all we are going to focus on today. Before we dive into the show, though, Thor, I know you're over at NBC Sports Edge right now. I had you on right around the time of the draft when you were really, really busy at the time. I think things might have cooled down for you a little bit, but now here we are. Camp is starting. We're just, a week away from preseason football. So let everyone know where they can find you on social media and what you've got going on right now.
Yeah, you can find me on social media at Thorku on Twitter. And what we're doing at work right now, I've been putting out my quarterback rankings for 2022. So, over the summer, you get a little bit more time to sort of dive into these kids in the coming class. And I've seen all these kids covering college football over the last couple of years, but being able to sort of parse their cut-ups, play by play, slow it down, go back, everything like that's been really fun. And then sort of coming up with my hierarchy of where I think they are. So I've been slowly marching through, like the bottom end of my top 10 and then going up. And, the last one I put out was Carson Strong, who's my preseason number 4, who's a super exciting prospect with a bazooka arm. So we've been having a lot of fun with that.
So this show should be a walk in the park because we're talking about this 2021 class and you're already scouting 2022. You're just on a different level than I'll ever be, Thor, just way ahead of us. Then we've also got Sam here, Swagman95 on Twitter. Sam and I, we connected a while back and have become really good friends. Thrilled for the opportunity to have him on this show. Sam, let everyone know where they can find you and what you are working on right now.
Yeah, like Dave said, you guys can find me on Twitter at Swagman95, staff writer for Ball Blast over there, and then now working at Football Guys alongside my good friend Dave Kluge here, doing some stuff there, dropping a player spotlight on Keenan Allen sometime this week or next week. But yeah, and then shout out to Carson Strong as well, who I absolutely love for next year.
Yeah, we'll have to have you guys on next offseason so we can talk about this 2022 class a little bit. But let's talk about the rookies today. And the first thing I want to talk about is that we have seen this entire fantasy football community has fallen in love with Trey Lance and Justin Fields. Hashtag Konami QB. Everybody's all about it. And Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson, they seem to be the kind of forgotten guys in this draft, even though they were the 1 and 2 pick overall. So, Thor, I'll start with you. But do you expect Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson to outperform either of these guys in fantasy football this year?
Yeah, I do. I think Trevor Lawrence for me would easily be the QB1, even for leagues this year. I remember in the Scott Fish Bowl, Trevor Lawrence was a guy that I wanted to get. I didn't end up getting the opportunity, but I also did one of those Roto Underworld, the draft, the kit that they do or whatever. And you can do a video on one guy. And so I got to do Trevor Lawrence, and yeah, like the sort of prompt was, at the time he was like QB 16 in leagues or, whatever his ADP was, 15, 14, I forget. But anyway, I chose to go under on that, that I thought he was going to be better than that this coming season. And it's funny what you say about the is it Konami code? How do you pronounce that?
Konami, I think. Yeah,
Konami code.
Konami.
Russian upside.
Shout out to my former coworker, Rich Freebar, on that one. But it's funny with that is the two guys you mentioned, they're known more for their mobility, but Trevor Lawrence is an extremely mobile quarterback, and they used his legs quite a bit at Clemson. And I can guarantee you they're going to be using it quite a bit in Jacksonville because I play college fantasy football a lot, as much as I play NFL fantasy, and the Urban Meyer system has long just been a bonanza for dual threat quarterbacks. You go back to his time at Utah with Alex Smith, and then all the guys he had at Ohio State. JT Barrett was like an enormous fantasy QB every single year. Cardale Jones the one year, et cetera. And then obviously his work at Florida, Tebow and those kind of guys. So they do a lot of stuff, or they're going to play at hyper tempo, number one, which is big. They're going to be playing from behind quite a bit, and they will use Lawrence's legs a ton, and obviously in the backfield, he's got the kid he's been playing with the last 3 years in ETN. So I think you're going to see like a lot of the RPO stuff and a lot of, design runs for Trevor. And then I think they're also going to push it down the field because he's got a bazooka. DJ Shark, coming out, that was the one thing, that we knew he could do for sure was take the top off. And they got the other weapons too. Chenault is a guy that I think is going to be a big breakout star in this coming season. I think he's going to be the guy that is in that Percy Harvin role, that Urban always has. Obviously, in training camp, they looked at ETN for that for a little bit, but I think that's going to end up being Laviska. And I just think they have a lot of weapons there. He's going to get a lot of usage. He's going to be able to run. He's going to score rushing touchdowns, may lead this class in quarterback rushing touchdowns this coming season. So I'm pretty bullish on Lawrence.
Yeah, I love everything that you said there, and we're going to talk about ETN a little bit. And you mentioned Laviska Shenault, and I really thought that Laviska Shenault was going to take on this sort of Percy Harvin role in the offense, and I was really excited for it. Now I worry that ETN might cut into that quite a little bit. We'll save that for a minute, but what are you thinking, Sam? I know we just talked about Trevor Lawrence a lot, and I agree that he's got that rushing upside. But Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, are these guys that you're excited about, or are you ranking Lance and Fields ahead of those guys?
Well, I think something that is going a little under the radar is how much are Trey Lance and Justin Fields going to play. We already know that Matt Nagy doesn't want to start Justin Fields right away, and neither does Kyle Shanahan. I think Fields starts sooner than Lance does. I think it's very possible that if San Francisco starts strong, we might not see Trey Lance for the first full half of the season. So, given all that, I'm definitely going with Thor and saying Trevor Lawrence is going to be better. I think it's possible that we see Zach Wilson put up some nice numbers too. They're going to be playing from behind a lot as well. And the weapons aren't as bad as in years past for Zach Wilson. I mean, Elijah Moore is there. He's going to become a safety blanket. Corey Davis was just signed to a big contract. And then you still have Jamison Crowder coming back as well as Denzel Mims. But yeah, I mean, I definitely see Trevor Lawrence being, a fringe QB1 this year in fantasy. I mean, how can you not? He has all these weapons. Plus, again, the RPO scheme that Meyer loves to run just makes it seem like Thor said, it's going to be a bonanza of fantasy points for that team that's going to be playing from behind so much.
And that's why I wanted to start off with this question, because I just wanted to highlight. I kind of knew how you guys were going to answer this, but it seems like Trevor Lawrence is the forgotten guy, even though he's like one of the best prospects that we've seen coming into the league. First overall pick, going to a team that is loaded with skill players, and people are still falling in love with Justin Fields and Trey Lance. But let's talk about those two guys for just a quick second. I'm wondering right now, between Justin Fields and Trey Lance, Sam, you could answer this one first. Which one do you prefer when you're drafting? Is there a guy that you're trying to get before the other?
Oh, yeah, it's definitely going to be Fields for me. Like I just said, who knows when Trey Lance is going to take the field. He was regarded as being more raw coming out than Fields was. And even though he went earlier, I think Fields has much more of a path to start. I think, we could even see him, Matt Nagy has come around in recent days. It kind of sounded like he was coming around to even starting him week 1. I think that would be not smart, so he doesn't get killed by Aaron Donald in week 1. Let's leave Andy Dalton for that. I know Dave would be very happy about that, to see Justin Fields start as early as week 2. So I think he's there. And, again, I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo is as terrible of a quarterback. I think with that whole team, you could see him hold together that offense for at least a few weeks. So I think we see Justin Fields first.
Yeah, I think it's Jimmy Garoppolo's job to lose, and he's won a lot of games in San Fran, and I'd be shocked if he played himself out of a starting role this year. I saw you nodding a lot here, Thor. Do you kind of agree with that Fields is the guy that you're going for ahead of Lance?
I do, for sure. Yeah, and a part of it's just circumstantial there. Trey Lance coming in, I mean, he's historically inexperienced for, I mean, not just like a top 3 prospect, overall prospect or 10 or first. It's like, that's been taken in the first round. 17 FCS starts. And didn't play last season. I mean, they had the one fall game, and then, the rest of NDSU's schedule went to the spring, and Lance left. That's a kid that has to take a redshirt season. And if it, and this is what I said about, so when Lamar Jackson came out, I was one of the few guys that ranked him top 5 in his class. I ranked him number 5. And with Jackson, I was like, but even though I love him, he has to sit for a year, or he should be sitting for, deep into it. And they ended up starting him at the very end of that season, and were able to use his legs. And that's something I think you could also see with Lance. But even a guy like Jackson was way more experienced than Lance is coming in, right? Again, it's 17 starts in the FCS against, Jackson was probably approaching 30 in the ACC when he left. So it's just kind of a different thing like that. And I agree with keeping him on the bench. There's so many things to say about the upside of Lance. Like, we don't see quarterbacks that have done what he did in 2019. I mean, that's also historically unprecedented, like the 28-0 TD-INT ratio, leading a team to a championship, is in the FCS, but super impressive. And you have the explosive elements of his game, the efficiency elements of his game, And then the fact that he doesn't turn the ball over. It's not just the lack of interceptions, also fumbles, also turnover-worthy plays. It's not a fluke. People weren't dropping passes he threw to him. He just didn't put the ball in harm's way, even though he happened to be super-duper explosive, super-duper efficient. And then obviously you have the dual threat as well as the bazooka on him. So even though I'm bullish on him going forward, again, I would say the same thing I said about Lamar Jackson, which is just like he should be on the bench to start for sure. Whereas with Fields, I think it's absurd that they came out already and said that Andy Dalton's the starter. I think that's borderline scandalous to not let those two people go against each other in camp. The value you're going to get from Justin Fields' legs on a quarter-to-quarter basis over Dalton is so enormous that you have to justify Dalton being X amount better as a passer. And I don't think that you can do that anymore. So the fact that they're not even going to take a look at that, or they claim they're not going to, and it's Andy's team. You made one mistake by giving Dalton way more than he was worth in free agency, and now apparently you're gonna double down on that mistake by starting Fields on the bench. I don't think Fields needs to be on the bench. We just saw him torch the Clemson defense to the ground. A Brett Venables defense, rain and fire from the sky, when Justin Fields had a throwing thumb injury from the week before against Northwestern, and when James Skalski broke his ribs right before halftime, and he got a little shot at halftime, like the Varsity Blues special, and he comes out and was just dealing. The Brent Venables defense, that is as complicated as it gets in defense in college for college quarterbacks to go up against. He ain't gonna have a problem starting right away. He should be starting right away, in my opinion. But the big mistake there again was say that they'll have it for a competition. But for sure, I'm going with Fields over Lance for this coming season.
Yeah, that's easy.
That's exactly what I want to hear, man. As a Bears fan, it blows my mind that they want to start Andy Dalton, and I think it's just crazy. A money thing. They gave him $10 million, and they're like, we have to justify this contract, and so they might put him out for a few weeks, but. Man, if Justin Fields is outplaying him in camp, they just need to do it. Just give the job.
They definitely never envisioned that they would be able to draft someone like Justin Fields in the draft. And when he fell to 11, I mean that was just so unprecedented. Even for all of us in the fantasy community, we all were projecting Justin Fields to be, probably should have been the second QB off this board. So for him to drop all the way to 11, it was almost a no-brainer for them to come up and get him.
Couldn't agree more. Mm-hmm. Let's switch to running backs because I don't think there's going to be too many other quarterbacks that are going to be fantasy relevant out of this class. But let's start with Najee Harris and Travis Etienne, who were the only first-round picks in this season as far as running backs go. Now, Najee is getting drafted in the first and second round of fantasy drafts, where Etienne is dropping into the 4th to 6th round range. And I don't really understand why that gap is so wide. So, Thor, I'll start with you on this. Do you think that there should be this huge gap between Najee and Etienne, or are they a little bit closer?
I think I'd be okay with that. I prefer Javonte even this season to Etienne, so I'll just get that out of the way. Certainly do long term as well. But Najee, I think the discrepancy there is just we know that he's going to take over and be sort of unimpeached for that job, right? And whereas the only thing with Etienne right now, it's more of the usage and then the role, right? We talked before about how they were trying him in the the H-back kind of thing, the Percy Harvin position initially in camp, but that was absurd when it was happening. Travis Etienne is not a great receiver at this point. He caught a lot of balls last season, but earlier on in his career, his first 2 seasons at Clemson, he was not playable on third downs. He couldn't catch the ball. He wasn't comfortable running routes. He did not pass block. And then the last couple of seasons, they made a more concerted effort to get him involved with that, in part because he asked the coaches to, but it was a lot of dump off stuff. That's why when people were comparing him to Alvin Kamara in the draft class, I just shook my head because it was more with Etienne. He's more of a Reggie Bush type player. It's the north-south explosion thing. And Reggie was even a bit more polished as a receiver than Etienne. So I thought that idea was ridiculous, especially when you have a guy like Laviska Shenault there. So then, if that's not going to happen, then it's him against Robinson. I really like Robinson. I'm not sure that they would start the undrafted guy from last year over the guy that the new administration just took in the first round. That would probably they would consider that a bad look for them. But I think, that would probably be closer to 50-50. And then, going to Najee, he's going to get all the receiving usage as well. That. It's not just the touch he's going to get as a running back, but what he brought to any offense that took him was you're basically getting a second tight end when you throw the ball. right? Because you're talking 6'2", 230, and then he's got super duper long arms too. Like he's got the wingspan of more like a 6'4", 6'5" guy. And Najee actually runs the routes, right? Like he can catch the ball on the fly, you know, tuck it in, keep running, you know, stuff like that. Whereas with ETN, you just don't see the same kind of crispness, you know, running the routes, the advanced sort of understanding of what to do, and then sort of that fluidity, right? You know, from getting the ball to sort of then turning up field and, you know, making a guy miss right away. Like with ETN, it's the same thing as when he's running from behind center. He's looking for the straight shot down the field. You know, it's like Darrell Henderson was another guy like this, you know, coming out of college, but, you know, with ETN, it's, you know, just a higher phylum of it, but you're looking for that straight line, that one crease, and then just hit the gas pedal. Not as much about making people miss and stuff like that. So anyway, I would agree with Najee a couple of rounds ahead of ETN.
Yeah, and you know, you talked about James Robinson a little bit, and that's actually when I became a Thor Nystrom fan, was when I came across this video from May, like immediately after the draft, and you were saying, hey, just keep an eye on James Robinson, and this is when Leonard Fournette was still on the team, and you were already hyping up James Robinson, so that's when I was like, I think this guy knows what he's talking about, and I've been a fan ever since.
Appreciate it.
The same thing.
I'm going to have a UDFA running back for this year too, Dave, for later on.
J.V. Hawkins?
J.V. Hawkins.
All right, we'll get to him in just a little bit.
Okay.
But Sam, what do you think about ETN? Do you think that he's overpriced? Do you think he's underpriced? Or do you think that he's kind of where he should be?
I think he's a little overpriced too. I mean, Thor said this so much better than I could have. I really do think that ETN, what people think that he can do is a little overhyped as to what he probably will do. I mean, the fact that they kept James Robinson, they haven't traded James Robinson, they haven't outrightly cut James Robinson, means that they plan to use him a fair amount. I mean, you don't just jettison a guy who just had almost, over 1,300 scrimmage yards last year, even as a UDFA. I mean, he rushed for over 1,000 yards, so he's going to be involved. He might be the early down guy for all we know. For this year, I think it's much more likely that ETN takes over the 3 down back role in future years, but I don't think it happens this year. I think we really do see some sort of a timeshare there.
Oh,
and
man.
I do think, I just don't see a whole lot of ceiling with ETN for this year and, this year simply. So I'm definitely comfortable with taking Najee, 2 to 3 rounds ahead of ETN. I really don't have a lot of ETN at all. I will admit that our good friend Jeff Bell's article changed my mind a little bit on him, shout out Jeff, but I don't see it, I don't see it for this year.
Yeah, and I was kind of off on ETN until Jeff wrote that article, and just, when you start thinking about the college connection that they had, thinking that he can kind of be the engine of this offense, it's enticing, but you guys make some really good points. Now I'm sweating a little bit with all my ETN shares, but let's talk about your guy, Thor, and I'll have Sam answer this first. But, Javonte Williams, he missed the first round, but I'm wondering, Sam, do you think that he's good enough to carve out a fantasy relevant role on this Broncos team, or do you think that it's still Melvin Gordon's?
Oh yeah, and I really am. I'm so happy that Thor and I are kind of in synergy here on a lot of these guys that we've talked about so far. I also had Javonte Williams very close to being my RB1 pre-draft. He was still almost there after the draft. I'm a very big proponent of thinking that Melvin Gordon is kind of dusty at this point. I think that he would be a really good trade deadline guy for a team needing a running back. I just think that Javonte Williams was drafted very high. I think he can do everything on the field. And I think, something that people knock him for, his pass catching ability, is really underrated for a guy who runs as hard and well as he does. I think he'll have the goal line role almost immediately. Melvin Gordon will probably switch to being, kind of a change of pace guy / the 3rd down back role for the first part of the season. But I think as the season goes along, we're going to see Javonte Williams take more and more and more of that role. And again, like I said, it wouldn't surprise me if Melvin's traded at the trade deadline to kind of cut down his cap hit a little bit. And then Javonte Williams is the guy. So he's there for me. I'm more than happy to take him, as like my RB2. And I think next year he's probably pretty close to an RB1.
And I see Thor just nodding his head nonstop as you were talking. So, Thor, what do you have to say about Javonte Williams? I know you're a huge fan.
I'm going to agree there, but I'll go further. If Melvin Gordon still thinks he's the starter and that's going to be an issue, I would just give him his walking papers now. Javonte Williams is a better running back than Melvin Gordon right now. And I'm not sure that it's super duper close either. I think that's going to become readily apparent in August. And I don't know what they do then, but to me, Melvin Gordon is not an impediment for Javonte Williams playing this year. You're talking about two players that are now in different phylums. Javonte Williams, he doesn't have the long speed or the burst of ETN, we were just talking about him. With Harris, he's not as good of a receiver as Harris right now. But he's got a much better burst than Harris. He's got more speed than Harris. And to echo what Sam was saying, Javonte Williams is a better receiver than people think. For him, it was circumstantial at UNC. He just so happened to go to UNC, this program that before wasn't as good, but he just happened to go there at the same time. His time coincided with Michael Carter. Michael Carter, I comped in the last draft class to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You're not going to take Michael Carter off the field on passing downs. That would be really, really stupid. In the same way that if LSU hadn't used Clyde Edwards-Helaire as a receiver, it would have been like, what are you doing? You were just going to do that. And because of that, earlier on in his career, Javonte didn't get as many receiving, opportunities, but he got better and better at that. He also got better and better as a pass blocker, to the point where now he's like a legitimately good pass blocker. And just speaking to the receiving stats, 58 career targets. He was in college for 3 years, so he had 58 targets, 3 years, caught 49 of those balls, 84.5%, only dropped 4 catchable throws. And he's not, I talked about how ETN, it was a lot of like dump off stuff like that. Williams last year ranked 22nd out of 98 qualified running backs with 1.64 yards per route run. So he was getting out there a little bit too. And once he gets the ball, his thing, it's power, and the best game for people to watch him. You want to get a taste of him. It's the Miami game. He just ran over people like it was like watching it was more like watching like X-Men, the movie, when the dudes like rampage through people and brick walls and stuff. He has crazy power and his burst, to go along with it. And where Javonte got better and better at UNC, we saw it jump in this aspect of his game this past season. It was the vision thing, because he always had the burst and he always had the power. And some of those different things, and he can make guys miss and stuff like that. But before, what it was is, in that sort of zone blocking scheme, it was he could sometimes get swallowed up by the ocean and the tide. But this past season, he started the decision making process. You could see it had just gone way up. So all of a sudden, whereas before he was getting stuck behind the line some, this past season he was consistently getting into the second level. And if you had soft players in your second and third level, like the Miami Hurricanes, he was going to eat you alive. Because if you don't have guys like linebackers that are going to, can bring their lunch pail, you're not going to take down Javonte Williams. It's going to take multiple guys. And so, that's when he really started to eat. And this past season started to give him more targets, even with Michael Carter on that team. They essentially had to force like this, because like Javonte is good enough for this. It's just before we haven't been able to use him like this. And again, he acquitted himself very well. The other thing I'll say about, him in terms of against these other guys, looking at it from a more like long-term perspective, like when we talk about some of these guys you guys remember Derrick Henry's draft class. And the reason that he fell was because it's like, he's taking so many hits. He's taking so many hits and the wear and tear thing. Well, if you're going to do that to knock a guy down, you ought to do it on the other side of it where, he comes in with fresher legs. I didn't hear that as much for Javonte, but because, the negative thing was, he lost out on some pass catching opportunities and stuff like that to Carter. But on the very positive side, he does not have the wear and tear that either ETN or certainly Harris do. So I think he's going to have a very long career, and I think he's going to be starting very quickly.
Yeah, right. He's 20 years old and he weighs 225 pounds. That guy's going to be a bowling ball for years. He'll be at the goal line on every single goal line snap this year.
Yeah, should be. And Sam alluded to it a little bit, but he was talking about how Melvin Gordon is a very likely candidate to either get traded or cut. And if that happens, Javonte Williams is going to skyrocket up draft boards. So where you can get him right now in the 6th, 7th, 8th round, that's such a good grab, just on the off chance that he does get traded. Yeah, I mean, you can stumble into a guy that's got, low-end RB1, high-end RB2 upside that you can get midway through your draft right now. So love everything that you guys are saying about
Dave,
Javonte Williams.
I want to toss one other thing out about Javonte Williams. One other thing I don't think people understand about him is, even though UNC, they had the awesome quarterback, Sam Howell could be a top 5 pick in the next draft. They had the good receivers, Diami Daz, etc. But what I don't think people realize is their offensive line stunk the last couple years.
Yeah, it
was
wasn't
like
good.
really bad. So the last 2 seasons they ranked number 71, number 74 in power success rate, and the last 2 seasons they ranked number 49 and number 101 in Football Outsiders stuff rate. They also ranked number 91 and number 81 in PFF run blocking grade the last 2 years. Despite all that, not only was Javonte getting better and better and better, last season he had a 95.9 rushing grade from PFF. That's the highest grade they've ever given to a running back during their college era. This kid's a special prospect, and it took a while for people to start getting on board with it. I put him out as RB1 in February. There wasn't a lot of people on that train, and then right before the draft, PFF switched him to their number 1 running back, and maybe a couple others did too. But I think like the hype he started to get, it was more because people were digging more into his tape, and then also being like, oh, the lack of receiving down snaps over his career, that didn't have anything to do with him. That had to do with Michael Carter. And then you start realizing, oh, his offensive line stunk. But unlike, a guy like Cam Akers or some other guys that we get, consistently stuff behind the line at Florida State, that didn't really happen to Javonte, especially last year, like I said, because the vision got better. So I just think he's a really special prospect.
Yeah, my favorite guy to compare him to is Nick Chubb. I think that could be a realistic output for him. If he gets that starting job, he'll be there.
Love to hear all that. So let's get off because we talked about the big 3, the first guys that went off the board. But who are some other running backs in this draft class that you think could make a splash as a rookie? Thor, why don't you start us off? I know you've got a couple guys that you'd probably be able to talk about.
Yeah, you said draft, so I'll save my Falcons guy for in a little bit. As far as the draft goes, one guy that I love that got taken early day 3, and actually kind of broke my heart because my team, the Minnesota Vikings, took another running back 1 pick before this guy, is Ramondre Stevenson. I think Ramondre Stevenson's a stud, and I think he's also going to play pretty early. I'm not going to say that he's going to start right away because obviously they have a deeper backfield situation. He doesn't have quite as much draft equity behind him. But I think we're going to see him on the field this season for sure as a part of a timeshare. And it wouldn't surprise me if pretty soon he is the bell cow back there. He has just explosive power. It's like watching a dog get too close to the electric fence. Some of the guys that try to tackle him, I mean, it's like hitting a brick wall and then you just slide off him like a cartoon. The game to watch with him is the Florida game, the bowl game from last season. They had a really, really hard time tackling him. He's a kid who has good vision. Again, there's the power. And I think maybe some people didn't realize it during his draft class, this in the spring, because Stevenson had dropped 15 pounds like for the pre-draft process. And he didn't test great. He tested as a slightly above average athlete, but like top end speed was never his thing, in the same way that it's not for the first running back that was taken, Najee Harris, right? Like, it's sort of similar like that. But again, like the power is very, very much for real. And the other thing he's got going for him, he's not just like a plotting power kind of back. His second best trait, and maybe even be his best trait, is actually his feet. He is a very nifty footed big fella. And the way you see this manifest is like like the linebacker, the safety, whatever, you'll see him descending on him, on Stevenson. And you, if it's one guy, you got to bring your hammer to try to take that guy down. And a lot of times, they're diving at him, waist or lower or whatever. And Stevenson has the ability to change the target right in the split second leading up to that contact point because his feet are so good. In a way that surprises defenders. And so he already has really good contact bounce. He already has really good power. But the fact that very few defenders get clean shots on him because of that, it makes his those ridiculous broken tackle numbers go up all the more. And the other thing I'll say about Ramondre is, like people were, he flew in a little bit under the radar. I want to talk about his circumstances. He went to JUCO for a couple years beforehand, before he eventually got to college. He was one of the most prolific JUCO backs of the last like 15 years, just absolutely obliterated the JUCO level. And then when he came up to Oklahoma, he got suspended at the end of his first season because he had for marijuana, which is not going to be tested for too much longer and should be legal around the country anyway. But his JUCO coach came out and said, basically this is absurd that Ramondre Stevenson had to pay not only the bowl game, but his first 3 games, next season. He never had a failed drug test for me. He never was out of line for me. One of the favorite guys I ever coached for my entire career. Like, I love him. And he was like, basically I bet my career that Ramondre is going to be a success. And then Ramondre came back this past season. He didn't get to play like in Oklahoma's first 3 games, something like that. And obviously their season was a little bit shorter. But you'll recall Spencer Rattler, who now is the QB1 for everybody. The one thing that you read about Spencer Rattler, remember, for the folks who were following Oklahoma at the beginning of last year, was the first 3 games he was very, very up and down. He threw a bunch of interceptions. He actually got benched in the Texas game. And it wasn't until the 4th game when his play started to go up. And then by the end of the season, he was just dominating. Well, again, contextually, you know what happened then? Ramondre Stevenson came back on the team. So all of a sudden, instead of being able to drop the guys back like you do against Mike Leach, where you can just send 8 guys back into coverage and rush the 3 or whatever, they couldn't do that shit to Spencer Rattler anymore, right? Like, you had to have guys in the box or Ramondre Stevenson was going to eat you alive. And so once that started to happen, now we had more spacing on the outside, and Rattler his game just leveled up. That doesn't get talked about enough, and it should.
Yeah. And I think a big thing too is, he had, like you already mentioned, the suspension. So people think that he has character issues because of that.
Yep.
And then because he didn't test that well, he kind of fell in the draft. But he's one of those guys that I think there's a huge polarization between, like, the guys that watch him play and the guys that are hardcore into analytics, because analytically there isn't anything that really gets you that excited. But when you watch this kid play, he is something special. And, I've been a guy that's been beating the drum for Damian Harris all offseason. And as soon as I saw that landing spot, it worried me just a little bit. I don't know how often the Patriots are going to get into the red zone, but once they're there, how are you going to stop Cam Newton, Ramondre Stevenson, Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry, Kendrick Bourne? I mean, this team is just loaded with red zone weapons. So I don't know if they're going to be able to get to the red zone often, but when they get there, watch out, because they got some hammers. Who's your guy, Sam, looking at some of these deeper running backs that you're getting excited about?
So I was going to go Michael Carter until we spent the last, 15 minutes discussing him. And while I think that's a great one, I'm going to go with a guy who was drafted to my team, the Eagles, and I'm going to go with Kenneth Gainwell. And I had Gainwell ranked as my RB4 going into the draft. And I think he went to a place where he's going to see a lot of playing time early. The Eagles aren't really too big on 3-down backs. They certainly haven't given Miles Sanders the keys to the kingdom yet. It remains to be seen if they ever will. But drafting Gainwell in the 5th round, they really kind of got a steal for a guy who can kind of do everything for them. He's a little bit undersized, but I mean, in his junior year, because he opted out of the senior season in 2020, in his junior year, he was averaging almost 150 scrimmage yards a game, over 100 on the ground, 43 through the air. I mean, this was a team that still had Antonio Gibson on it. And, Kenneth Gainwell was the guy who was rushing for, 1,500 yards. So I think Gainwell can really do everything. He measured out really well. He's a great pass catcher, one of probably the best pass catcher in this draft, I would say. And I think that he's going to contribute early and often in a scheme like the Eagles, where Sirianni comes over from Indy, might see Gainwell as his Nyheim Hines and use him exactly that way. So, maybe we see 60 catches this year from Kenny Gainwell. Maybe not that much on the ground, but I do think he gets a couple change of pace carries here and there. And I think we see a nice productive season from Gainwell. He's going at pretty much the back of all drafts. You can get him really cheap.
That's another landing spot where I was beating the drum for Miles Sanders finally to get his opportunity and be a running back one. And then one of my favorite prospects landed on his team. But Thor, I know you want to talk about Javian Hawkins a little bit too, a guy that went undrafted. So let's hear, why should we get excited about Javian Hawkins? Because right now everyone's going goo goo gaga over Mike Davis and his big quads. But why is Javian Hawkins the guy that's on your radar?
Well, I think if I'm running an NFL offense, I think, and especially with that organization where they're not going to be winning this season, I would much rather have Javian Hawkins getting my carries. It's similar to why, I seen the Robinson thing, above Fournette. It's just like, why, and Davis, I'm sure they'll keep on the roster because then they signed him this past off season. So I'm sure but
before the draft.
So a slightly different situation with that, where they're gonna have to stay there or whatever. But Hawkins, he has a bunch of NFL skills. The reason people were down on him, there's sort of multiple reasons for that too. I mean, he's a scat back, he's a little bit smaller, and he's a poor pass blocker. And then he only had 21 catches in college. But again, you have to consider the circumstances behind all these guys. First of all, Hawkins redshirted his freshman year. He exploded in 2019. He was one of the nation's most dangerous running backs because what his thing is, it's crazy speed. And then he's got like cat-like quicks, and he can make people miss. And so it's like he can find the space himself. And then if he's got a runway, he's gone. Because he also brings the wheels with it. But the other thing I want to say is people were a little bit, it's not just the pass blocking. They think he can't catch because, that 2019 season, even though he exploded as a running with the rushing stats and stuff, he did not have many targets. In this past season, he got a little bit more. However, he ended up opting out before the season was done. And so he got basically one full season as a starter and then like another sort of like half or a little bit more than half. But he, Satterfield started to use him more as a receiver this past season, like I said. And I think Satterfield, to a man, would admit that it was a mistake not to get him, Javian Hawkins, more touches beforehand. Dave, let me ask you something. Out of Javian Hawkins' career, how many targets do you think he dropped?
I feel like you're setting me up for so I'll highball it a little bit. 8. I think he has 8 drops.
0. He dropped 0. And so again, going to like back to the thing of like, yeah, he only had 21 catches, right? But he only had 21 targets. And the other thing I'll say is in high school, one of the reasons why he was sort of
not even drops. You're just saying that he caught every single target.
He caught every single target.
Wow.
Every single target. Did not have one drop in college. And the other thing I'll say about the receiving thing is one of the reasons Javian Hawkins sort of flew under the radar as a recruit was because in high school, you know what position he started at? It wasn't running back. It was wide receiver. He was a wide receiver and then a slash weapon like up through like the junior year of high school. And then finally as a senior, then he was a full-time running back. So again, you want to talk about a mistake of a coaching staff. Scott Satterfield, that was his first season at Louisville. He had just come from Appalachian State. And I think it was more of like this is my system, and like Javian dominated in the system. But again, like you should have been trying to get Javian the ball in space more because that's where he destroys people. I think you're going to see that more in the NFL. I think he has more receiving chops than people realize because of that. He does have the deficiencies. He's going to go down on first contact. He does not pass block very well. But the other stuff, you're going to get the explosiveness. You're going to get the explosive plays. And again, I think you're going to get more receiving utility there than people think. The other thing is we go back to the lack of wear and tear. A fresher guy coming in. Again, Javian Hawkins only started something like 14, 15 games in college, and he blew up like in every single one. He had like more than 100 yards. I'm dang near every single game that he played. But it's just that, he didn't have to take as many hits in college. So I'm super bullish on him, again, in conjunction with the fact that the Falcons just have the NFL stinkiest running back situation.
Right. Yeah. Everybody's going crazy about Mike Davis, and I just don't see it. He's somebody who's kind of been a career journeyman, and then he was in a system last year that really helped him. He wasn't even great last year. It was just he put up fantasy numbers because he was utilized so heavily in the passing game. But Mike Davis isn't the running back that people think he can be. So before we wrap up here, I've got 2 questions, and I'm going to give you guys the option of which one you want to answer. So the 2 questions that I want to know are either who is your wide receiver, your rookie wide receiver that you need to have in your draft class? And the other question that I want to know is, can Kyle Pitts buck the trend of rookie tight ends? And I'm interested. I'll let you guys choose which one you want to answer. Sam, we'll start with you. Do you want to give us your favorite tight end, or do you want to talk a little bit about Kyle Pitts?
I'll take my favorite wide receiver here. I can never pass up a chance to talk about Devontae Smith, who was my wide receiver 1 going into the draft. He's still my wide receiver 1 after the draft. I think going into Philadelphia, he walks into a situation where he can easily get 130 targets year 1. I think this is this might have been the best team in the draft for Devontae Smith to go to. So everything worked out for him. He's looked great in training camp so far. The thing about Devontae Smith is he plays so much bigger than he actually is. He's 6'1", playing like he's 6'4". And I'm not worried about the weight. I'm not worried about the BMI because he's shown that he can overcome it just because of how good of a route running technician that he is. He gets behind the guys, he goes up, he makes the catch. He doesn't have to use his body like Jamar Chase does. So, with Devontae Smith, Jalen Hurts gets someone who he's familiar with. I think people tend to overplay the connection between Jalen Hurts and Devontae Smith a little bit since they really didn't play together. They played together early, and then Hurts left for Oklahoma. But I think that Devontae Smith gets someone in Jalen Hurts who is young and hungry, and they're willing to work together to become a really good young quarterback wide receiver tandem. And in Philadelphia, there's not really that many targets to go around, or there's not that many targets being taken up. Jalen Reagor is not going to be a target monster. Neither is Travis Fulgham. And the other guy who's really going to challenge is Dallas Goedert. And, again, still not a huge tight end target guy. So I think we see everything for Devontae Smith to be the number one guy here. Nobody's saying he's going to have a Justin Jefferson type season. 1,400 yards is a little bit out of the question, but it wouldn't shock me at all to watch him have 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns. And he should go over 100 targets pretty easily.
Yeah, I mean, Jamar Chase, he was my wide receiver one before the draft, but that landing spot is just perfect for Devonta Smith. He's my number one rookie receiver as well. Now, Thor, let's throw it to you. Do you want to, take the chalky where you get to talk about Jamar Chase or Devonta Smith, or do you want to talk about Kyle Pitts a little bit here?
I'll talk about Kyle Pitts.
Let's hear it.
But Dave, I also wanted to say first to cap, you were talking about how many catches Mike Davis had last year. That's why they were excited. You remember who Mike Davis's quarterback was last year, who threw him all them dump offs?
Yes, sir. Teddy Bridgewater.
Javonte Williams, baby.
Williams.
Javonte Williams.
Exactly.
Think about the catches, folks. Think about the catches. Javonte, he has wanted to be a pass catch it back for years, but you just had to play Michael Carter. No more Michael Carter there. Yeah, he's going to catch a lot of balls this year. But yeah, as far as Pitts goes, yes to whatever. Yes, Pitts he's just a different thing, right? Like, we had a hard time figuring out, do we call him tight end? Do we call him a receiver? Last year it was like half the snaps were in line. A quarter of them were in the slot, and then a quarter of them were outside. He'll dominate you wherever you put him. And Dave, let's play this game one more time. Out of all of Kyle Pitts' catches last year, and he had one of the highest degrees of difficulty of any receiver in the nation. Because he had to catch all Kyle Trask ducks, 40 yards downfield around 3 guys all the time. Kyle Trask is just chucking it up and was like, please catch it and improve my draft stock. How many balls do you think Kyle Pitts dropped last year? Droppable targets.
I'm going to go with 5.
0.
Can't you see he's just setting you up for failure with this question?
But I got to set him up too. If I just say 0, it takes away the emphasis.
Yeah, I appreciate it. But yeah, no, he had 4.91 yards per route run, number 3 in the nation as a wide receiver. As a wide receiver, if you count him as a tight end, he blew everyone else out of the water. So again, all these ones way downfield, and that's what his game is. He's Megatron light, right? Like it's the exact same dimensions as Megatron essentially, although Pitts has longer arms. Yeah, exactly. He's got the longer arms. But and then he's just sort of like, a phylum below that in the testing numbers, but very close, right? Like, because Megatron is, you're talking about an all-time freak, and then Pitts are just, a little bit below that. But again, downfield, just eats. They couldn't stop him in college. 2 guys, 3 guys, it doesn't matter. He coming down with the ball. It's like, in basketball, when you got a guy who's like 3, 4, 5 inches taller than everyone, and then his wingspan's like 8 inches, bigger than everyone, and he can time the jump better than everyone, get down there faster than everyone, and he doesn't drop the ball. Nothing that touches his hands is going to hit the turf. So yeah, he's going to be a stud right away. I think that's the reason why you heard, in the weeks leading up to the draft, it came out that the Falcons were shopping Julio Jones. I don't think that was any coincidence at all. I think that was the day they decided we are going to take Kyle Pitts. And then it's like, well, we don't really, for where we're at, that becomes a bit of a superfluous skill set, with Julio. Let's just get Julio out of here because Kyle Pitts is going to be catching all the downfield stuff this year. I think he's going to get peppered with targets, and I think he's going to go off as a rookie. I would love to get Kyle Pitts. In fact, I almost took him in the second round, late second round of my Scott Fishbowl draft. Whatever that was, I don't know, it was a 26th, 27th pick, something like that. The only reason I didn't was because Aaron Rodgers in my draft happened to fall there. So I got Aaron Rodgers. I looked at the data of the drafts. It was me and one other dude in all of the 160 drafts got Aaron Rodgers in that slot. If my league hadn't just been like, Thor, please take Aaron Rodgers. And I that was the only time in my life I've ever taken Aaron Rodgers because I'm a Vikings fan. I hit him up, not a fan, but I had to take him. But if that had not happened, I would have taken Kyle Pitts. I'm very, very high on Kyle Pitts.
Yeah, and our friend Bo also took Kyle Pitts at 210 in Scott Fishbowl. So I guarantee he knows what you're feeling there.
Yeah. Man, I've been burned by rookie tight ends so many times in the past, and everyone tells me Kyle Pitts is different. But I heard that Noah Fant was different. I heard that TJ Hawkinson was different. I heard that and it's just I get nervous when it comes to drafting rookie tight ends, but Thor, you're a guy who I really respect when it comes to your scouting abilities. And if you're saying so, I might have to bump up my exposure on Kyle Pitts just a little bit. But
unicorn.
He's
You'll,
going to
you'll
be
be
fun.
hearing
Corn.
from me in the DMs. All right. When I get burned, you'll
Absolutely.
be hearing from
Sounds
me.
good. Yeah. Bring the
But,
receipts out.
But anyway, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I want to thank both of you guys for coming on today. Before we wrap up, Sam, one last time, let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter and what you've got going on right now, any articles or shows that you're working on.
Yeah, you guys can find me on Twitter at Swagman95, writing for Ball Blast and Football Guys. And then you guys can catch my Keenan Allen Player Spotlight dropping only on footballguys.com this week or next week sometime.
Yeah, love me some Keenan Allen. I can't wait for that to
yeah.
come out. Thor, let everyone know where they can find you and what you're working on right now as well.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Thorku, and then you can find my work. A lot of we were talking about the 2020 quarterback series that I'm doing, that thing, and then there's going to be a whole bunch of college football future stuff coming up. I've been doing the win total thing and stuff like that, a series for and videos and stuff like that, and we'll be more columns and stuff like that, hitting the our picks and stuff like that. So a lot of wagering content is going to be coming at you on NBC Sports Edge on the college football section.
Can't wait.
And I've got a huge push that I am trying to do this year, which is get ahead of the curve when it comes to college. So I will be checking all of that out because I don't want to be plugging in January trying to play catch up with all of these, incoming guys. So I will definitely be checking that. But want to thank the audience again for tuning in to episode 10 of the Launchpad. Next week, I'm going to have Josh Larkey and Kev on, and that's going to be a fun show. If you guys know them, they're some fun guys with some pretty hot takes and bold predictions. So that'll be a great show as we dive into that. But want to thank you guys for tuning in. We will see you next week. Have a great day.